Right, good afternoon, grade 12. I am sending you the next lesson. We are now on chapter 3. Remember, in the afternoon lessons, we did do the beginning of chapter 3. We have spoken about the composition of the public sector, and we have also gone through the necessity of the public sector. Right, so we are now going to start with the problems of public sector provisioning, and this is on page 50 in your textbook. This is a possible essay question. All right, I'm splitting this section into 2 lessons because it is very long. All right, so I'm going to do 3 of the problems today, and the next 3 problems I will deal with tomorrow. But this is an essay question. Right, so the first problem with public sector provisioning, remember we said one of the reasons why we need to have a public sector is that they need to provide public goods and services. Right, so that's one of their functions. They have to provide public goods and services to us. Remember we spoke about the different merit goods that they provide, community goods and collective goods. That's the 3 categories of public goods that they provide to us. Now what this essay is focused on is the problems that the government encounters when they provide public goods and services. All right, so the first problem is accountability. Accountability means to explain your decisions, your actions and expenditures. All right. Now, one of the principles of good governance is accountability. The public sector, the state president, any public official must be held accountable for the implementation of their policies. Right. Us at the public, we need to be sure that the public sector will deliver the goods and services that they are supposed to deliver, and we need to be sure that they will not abuse their power. All right, so accountability means that they have to explain to us why they are doing what they are doing. All right, for example, now with this lockdown, with the coronavirus, they didn't just announce it. The president, Cyril Ramaphosa, he had a whole speech on TV. He discussed the problem with us. He explained to us why it is necessary to take these steps. All right, they are accountable to us. They have to explain their decisions. They have to explain why they do what they do. They have to explain to us what they are doing with our tax money. All right, now there's 2 different kinds of accountability. We distinguish between economic accountability and financial accountability. Right. Economic accountability refers to the policies that the government is implementing. All right. So in other words, which policies are they using? How effective are those policies? Are those policies reaching their goals? So if they're implementing a policy and the policy does not reach its goal, the government has a responsibility to explain to us why those policies did not reach their intended goals. All right. Economic accountability refers to their policies. Financial accountability, this has to do with expenditure control. All right. The government has to explain to us what they are going to do in terms of taxes. Now, how are they going to levy the taxes? How many taxes do we have to pay? And they have to explain to us how they intend on using our tax money. All right. So economic accountability is about their policies. Are their policies effective or not? Financial accountability refers to expenditure control. Are they using the tax money for which it was intended? Right. Now, there's 2 elements of accountability. So in other words, to ensure accountability in government, there has to be participation and transparency. Participation is our responsibility. Transparency is the government's responsibility. All right. So participation means that us as citizens, we live in a democratic country and we have the right to participate in the economy. All right. First of all, the way that we participate is we have democratic elections. And by exercising our right to vote, we choose who gets to run this country. We choose the political party that gets to be government. All right. Now, I know in our constitution, it says that people have a right to vote. It is not really a right, okay? It is a responsibility. Voting day in our country always is a public holiday. And some people use it as that, a public holiday. They sleep late, they have a braai with friends, and they don't go and vote. Right. That is not what we are supposed to do. As responsible citizens, we are supposed to participate in the process of voting. We have a responsibility to vote. All right. And the way that we are supposed to vote, obviously, not everybody takes it that seriously, but we are supposed to study the constitutions of the different political parties. And we need to vote for a political party that we believe stands for the things that we stand for. So, for example, if we feel strongly about death penalty, we should vote for a political party that promotes the death penalty, just as an example. All right. But as I said, not many people take it that seriously. But normally when we have elections, if people complain about what the government is or is not doing, the first thing you ask them is, did you vote? Did you vote in the last elections? And if they say no, you tell them, well, they need to shut up then, right? Because they didn't exercise their vote. It is then their fault that we are having issues in government. Now, if they voted, they could have made a difference. All right. So the first very important thing is that us as citizens must participate. First of all, by voting in the elections, because by voting, we get to say who runs the country. All right. Then participation can also take different forms. Okay, like for example, trade unions. You need to be a member of a trade union to sign petitions. Yeah, that is participation. If there's people that's signing, nowadays they do it on social media, right? If you get an invite there on your Instagram account or whatever to sign a petition to promote animal rights, or anti-animal cruelty or whatever, that is getting involved, right? If in your area you've got a neighborhood watch, instead of just sitting around complaining about the crime rate and how the criminals are taking over this country, but you sit behind your high walls and behind your locked doors or whatever, then you're part of the problem, right? Participation means joining the neighborhood watch and becoming part of the solution. That is participation. All right. So participation is the citizen's responsibility. From the government side, they have to be transparent, right? So when we vote, for example, we can only make an informed decision if we have access to information. All right. So if from the government side, they are transparent, right? They tell us all the information. They don't hide certain information from us. When we have all the information that we need, then we can make an informed decision. All right. Transparency in government also helps us to fight corruption. A couple of years ago, the government tried to pass a law. Now it's loosely referred to the secrecy bill, right? But basically what they wanted was, and in Parliament they voted for it, they actually wanted to introduce this law that would make it illegal for journalists to expose government officials that is corrupt, right? So it would then not be possible for journalists to expose government officials for using public funds to buy fancy cars for themselves or go on holidays, paid holidays, with the family or whatever. It would make that kind of thing illegal. All right. Obviously, that goes against the principle of transparency, right? Because if they are able to hide from us what they are doing with our tax money, we wouldn't even know. Ne? That bill went right up to the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court obviously said they cannot do it because it will make the process not be transparent anymore. All right, we need the government to be transparent. We need to know what they are doing with our money so that if there is corruption, we can expose the corruption and we can deal with it. All right. In the different government departments in South Africa, how do we ensure accountability? Okay, first of all, obviously the government is divided into different departments. Now we have the Department of Finance, the Department of Education, the Department of Health, the Department of Environmental Affairs and Tourism. And each of those departments are headed by a minister. Now, that's the people that we see, the face of the department, right? Those ministers of the government departments, they are the spokespeople for their departments, right? So, for example, the Department of Education, the Minister of Education, if we think education, that is who we think of, right? We think, Minister of Education. And when she speaks, we think, okay, that's the Minister of Education. All right. But the Minister of Education is an expert in the field of education. Right. She's not an expert in the field of financial management. All right. So every single government department in our country has a minister, and that's the person that we know. But every single department also has a Director General, a DG, right? These are the accounting officers for that department. All the Directors General, they are accounting specialists. They know about financial management, and they are ultimately supposed to monitor the finances of each separate department. Secondly, we also have parliamentary questioning. Okay, now when we have voted in the general elections, when they announce the results of the election, they will announce, for example, the ANC have been voted, they have won 60 seats in parliament. The DA won 20 seats in parliament. The EFF won 10 seats in parliament. When they're referring to seats in parliament, they are literally referring to bums on seats in parliament. All right. So all the political parties that received more than a certain amount of votes in the election can become part of parliament. National Assembly means parliament. All right. So when anybody wants to, for example, introduce a new law, or they want to implement a new policy in government, or they want to increase taxes or whatever, everybody in parliament gets to vote. They get to ask questions and they get to vote. All right. So it's not a question of just, okay, well, the ANC is in government now and they can make decisions and they can implement policies without anything. They are held accountable by everybody sitting in parliament. Anybody can ask questions. If you think back a couple of years ago when Zuma was still president, Malema made like headlines in the news when in parliament he would constantly ask Zuma, hey, when are you going to pay back the money? When can we get back the money? When are you going to pay back the money? That is exactly what he is supposed to do in parliament, right? If you are in parliament, you are there to hold government accountable. You are supposed to question their motives. You are supposed to question their spending. So what he did, the way in which he did it, obviously now isn't very professional, right? But what he did was actually the right thing. All right. There's also portfolio committees, which is members of different political parties that monitor individual departments and also make recommendations. Anybody sitting in parliament have a say. They can come up with solutions. They can question anything that happens in there. All right. Then they also invite members of the public to participate in public hearings whenever, for example, they want to implement a new law. It is first published in the Government Gazette. That means now it is there for the perusal by the public. We are supposed to read that Government Gazette. We're supposed to read the new law, and then we are allowed to comment. Okay, we are supposed to, okay, but think about this, and what about this? What about change it like that, or whatever? After the deadline has been reached, they take it back into Parliament to discuss it. They adjust the law, they publish again. They wait for public opinion again. All right. Like, for example, with the changes to caps, obviously not for you in grade 12, but for the grade 10s and 11s this year, yours will come in next year, not going to help you, okay? But that was voted, right? The Government Gazette was sent to all the teachers, and we had to comment on the changes. Do we agree with the changes? Do we not agree with the changes? What other suggestions we wanted to make? Nothing is just done, all right? Members of the public have a say, and every member of the National Assembly also have a say. Right. Then the Standing Committee on Public Accounts is referred to the finances of the government. Also, they present the findings of the Auditor General in Parliament, and they provide their report to Parliament, obviously where people then can also question about what happened. Right, the fourth thing there is Treasury Control. Okay, the National Treasury is a part of the Department of Finance. They are obviously responsible for the budget, for expenditure control. Every single element in the public sector has to use procedures to obtain authorization to spend money. Nobody in government can just spend money, okay? There's specific rules and procedures that they have to follow, right? And the Treasury decides ultimately who is allowed to spend the money and who is not allowed to spend the money. We will look at this process in detail in the following lessons when we look at the budgeting process. All right, but basically the Treasury Committee, of which the leader, the chair, is the Minister of Finance, he will evaluate all the requests for additional funding. So after the budget has been approved, if there are departments that need additional funds, it is not just dished out to them. The Minister of Finance will evaluate this request and see if it is really necessary or not before he allocates them with the money. All right, but as I said, this exact procedure we will look at when we do the budget. Just know, obviously, that the National Treasury is responsible for the money. That financial accountability, it lies with Treasury. Right, the last thing is the Auditor General. All right, the Auditor General reports annually after every single budget. He will analyze, he will audit the budget and the actual expenditure by the different departments, and he will do a written report. Okay, so the Auditor General reports directly to Parliament. He looks at the amount of money that was allocated to the different departments, and he looks at how they spent that money. If there was overspending, if there was underspending, if he picked up on fraudulent spending, unnecessary, unauthorized spending, that will all be in his report to Parliament. All right, and very important, the Auditor General doesn't work for government. He works independently of government in terms of the Constitution. All right, so we can't say that the Auditor General will be unduly influenced by government officials. It is the Auditor General, a very, very qualified auditor person, to go over the finances of the government with a fine-tooth comb and to come to find any illegal expenditure, any corrupt expenditure, if there was any. All right, so that's accountability. That's the first reason why providing public services is sometimes difficult. All right, the second reason is efficiency. All right. Now, we did discuss in class what efficiency means. Okay, remember we said efficiency is getting the job done in the best possible way. All right, so for the government, efficiency is achieved when they are using their skills, their time, their resources to the best possible way in order to reach their objectives. Okay, you'll see later on in this chapter, the government has 5 objectives: a high and sustained economic growth rate, full employment, price stability, a more equal distribution of income, and then lastly, balance of payments equilibrium and exchange rate stability. So the government is efficient if they are using their skills and their resources, their money, their time in such a way that they reach their objectives. All right, so very important, goods and services must be provided in the desired quantity and quality. So they need to produce enough public goods and services so that everybody that wants access will have access. And the quality of the services that they provide must also be good. Okay, now, if resources are allocated in such a way that no one can be made better off without making someone else worse off, we call that Pareto efficiency. We're going to talk about this again later in the year. Okay, so Pareto efficiency is when the way in which resources are distributed, it is impossible for us to improve the welfare of one person without decreasing the welfare of another person. Okay, and we're not saying Pareto efficiency is a good thing. Okay, it's not about being good, or it's not about being fair. Okay, if all the resources have been distributed to Piti and Sunny, right? If Piti owns everything and Sunny has nothing, that is still Pareto efficiency, because in order to give Sunny something, we need to take something from Yanni. One person has to be worse off for the other person to be made better off. That is Pareto efficiency. Okay, now internationally, there's 3 reasons for inefficiency in the public sector. Okay, and the first reason is bureaucracy. All right, we looked at bureaucracy also when we did the public sector failures, right? Bureaucracy refers to the official rules and procedures that the government has to go through before anything gets done. Okay, now remember I said these rules and procedures are there also to protect us. If there wasn't rules and procedure, it would be very easy for government officials to defraud money and to use money for personal uses and whatever, rent seeking, okay? There has to be rules and procedures, right? But it means that in the public sector, everything takes time. All right, we are not going to solve a problem instantly. Okay, if they know they need to build more schools, for example, it is not a question of, okay, let's just build more schools, right? They have to first budget. They have to tell the Department of Education as to send a request to the Department of Finance. The Department of Finance first have to evaluate their request and weigh up, prioritize. What does other departments want? Do we really need education? Is education our priority at the moment? Then they will decide, okay, yes, we're going to approve it. And then they have to wait for the budget to be approved. And then they have to wait. After the Parliament approved the budget, they will eventually get their allocations. But everything takes time. They have to follow the rules and procedures. All right. And unfortunately, this creates inefficiency. All right, because it takes long. It's time consuming. It takes forever before they can make a decision. And then actually the procedure can be, or the new policy can be implemented or whatever. All right. The second problem that makes public service inefficient is incompetence. All right. So sometimes people get appointed in a position where they don't necessarily have the necessary skills to do their job properly. All right. So there's a lack of skill. There's insufficient experience. The person doesn't really know what he's doing. Okay. He doesn't have the proper qualifications to do his job. He hasn't received training. He lacks experience. He lacks motivation. Remember, we spoke about the feeling of apathy in the public sector as well. Okay. Remember, we said in the public sector, public servants gets paid whether they do their job well or whether they do a crap job, right? That's where the apathy comes from. They don't care if they are doing their jobs properly because they're going to get paid anyway. We did discuss this as well when we did the public sector failures. All right. So when people are appointed, and unfortunately this does happen in government, and we're not saying it doesn't happen in the private sector, it does, okay? But our focus here is on the public sector, obviously. All right, so if somebody gets appointed as the Minister of Finance, for example, that doesn't even have an accounting degree, knows nothing. The last accounting this person saw was EMS grade 9, and this person got like 20% for EMS grade 9. He knows nothing of accounting, but now he gets appointed as the Minister of Finance. Obviously, he's not going to do a great job. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of corruption and whatever. All right. So incompetence also is a very important reason. And then the last reason is corruption. All right. We spoke about rent seeking also when we did the public sector failures, right? Remember, that is the exploitation of your position for private gain. When government officials take bribes, when they use tax money to enrich themselves. Nepotism. If I appoint somebody as the Minister of Finance because he's my wife's cousin's brother, not because of his qualification, I appoint him because I know him. That is nepotism. All right. Now, the more corruption there is, corruption means that money that was intended for one thing is using for something else. All right. So, for example, let's say when Zuma built Nkandla, right? That money was indicated for something else. That money might have been supposed to be building houses for poor people, RDP houses for poor people. So instead of building 5,000 houses for poor people, he built himself a fancy-ass house. All right, that's corruption. That means public services are not going to be delivered. Houses for the poor people are not going to be built because the money was used for something else. Right. That's your second reason for public sector, the problem with public sector provisioning. The last one for today that we're going to look at is assessing the needs. All right. Now, there's a difference between how the private sector decides what to produce and how much to produce, and how the public sector decides how much and what to produce. In the private sector, supply responds to demand. All right. So when there's a demand for something, obviously, the producer will produce and he will supply. But in government, it's not about demand and supply. There is no pricing mechanism. All right. The government is supposed to provide goods and services according to the needs of citizens. All right. So, for example, In the private sector, houses are built according to the price that people are willing to pay for them. All right. So supply, as I said, reacts to demand. The number of houses that is going to be built by construction companies will depend on how many people are wanting to buy houses and how much money those people are willing to pay for those houses. All right. But in the public sector, housing is regarded as a social responsibility by the government. The government has a responsibility to make sure that everybody has a house according to the needs of the people. All right. There is no pricing mechanism. All right. The government has a responsibility to provide housing for those people who cannot provide for themselves. So they cannot go according to the price mechanism. The people that can afford houses, they will buy a house in the private sector according to the pricing mechanism. But the government has to supply houses for those people who cannot pay. So there's no price. Okay. So it's very difficult for the government to assess the needs. Now, where are those people that need houses? How many people are there that needs houses? All right. But also, their decision making is influenced by their financial resources. Obviously, there's millions of people that need houses, but the government doesn't have enough money to build millions of houses, right? Their tax money, their resources is also limited, and they have to prioritize. They cannot only spend all of their money on building houses, they also have to focus on social grants. They also have to stimulate economic growth. They also have to pay public servants. They don't just provide houses with all of their money. They have to prioritize. Okay. Now, in order to decide how many goods and services the households need, obviously I said government needs to know who these households are. Who are the households that need houses? Where are these households? What are their basic needs? All right. So where does the government get information about the citizens in the country? Obviously through the census. All right. They do a census, any other household surveys, they get the information from there. Now, obviously, they don't do a census every year. It's quite expensive to do that. So every now and then they will do a census, but in between census years, they will work on projections. All right. They will project more or less how much the need would have grown from the previous census up to then the current year. All right. Obviously, they also can get the information from tax returns. Local government, the municipality, should know what's happening in their municipality, and they should also be able to provide some more information to the government. Okay. Now, obviously, the government's decisions are also only as accurate as the information that they have access to. All right. So it's very important that they get accurate information and that they make sure that only those who qualify will receive assistance. All right. There's big corruption in public services as well, where people apply, for example, for a social grant. They apply for a social grant, a disability grant or whatever, social grant, child grant or whatever. And in order to qualify for those grants, you have to prove that you are earning less than a certain amount, because the grants are only supposed to help the very, very poor people. Now, there are some people, lots of people, that qualify for a grant. Okay, they do they hand in their forms, they prove that they're earning less than a certain amount, they make an affidavit at the police station or whatever, but their situation changes. All right, so 2 years after you've now qualified to get your grant, you claim your grant, 2 years later you actually find a job. And now you are earning an income. You are now not supposed to get a social grant anymore. But people don't say that to the government. They hide from the government the fact that they are actually earning an income now, and they keep claiming that grant. That is corruption. That means that that money that could have been used by somebody else that needs it more is now being claimed by a person that actually doesn't need it anymore. All right. Remember, even the government's resources are scarce, and they have a responsibility to satisfy the basic needs of everybody in the population. So they have to decide which needs are they going to satisfy, whose needs are they going to satisfy. As I said, they have to prioritize. Okay? They cannot satisfy everybody's needs all the time. All right. They're increasing the needs that they are satisfying. Okay? For example, the people that have access to electricity is increasing every year. The people with access to sanitation is increasing every year. But they can't wave a magic wand and say, abracadabra, wow, now everybody has access to sanitation. It costs money. So every year they allocate a little bit of money to expand the network, the sanitation network. So every year more and more people will have, and ultimately the hope is that everybody will have access. But obviously it takes time. They've got limited resources like anybody else, and they have to decide how they're going to allocate those resources. Who are they going to help? Where is the most urgent needs? The people that needs the help the most. All right, I'm going to stop there for today. So we did the first 3 problems with public sector provisioning. We looked at accountability, we looked at efficiency, and we looked at assessing needs. All right, so tomorrow I will continue with this lesson, and I'm going to repeat again. Remember, this is an essay question.